When we begin to ask why we fast, the first answer that emerges is not hunger, but mastery. Fasting is a deliberate interruption of habit. It is the conscious decision to step back from what the body constantly demands and to prove, in a quiet but powerful way, that desire does not have absolute authority over us. In an age defined by instant gratification where food is available at any hour, entertainment is limitless, and comfort is treated as a necessity rather than a luxury, fasting stands as a rare act of resistance. It reminds us that the human being is not merely a creature of appetite, but a being capable of restraint, intention, and higher purpose. Psychologically, this is transformative. Every time a person feels hunger yet chooses patience, a subtle shift occurs in the mind. The voice that says, "I must have this now," is gently overruled by a deeper voice that says, "I am in control." Over time, this repeated act of choosing discipline over impulse strengthens the will in ways that extend far beyond food and drink. The same inner strength that resists a sip of water during fasting hours becomes the strength that resists anger in moments of conflict, temptation in moments of privacy, and despair in moments of hardship. What begins as physical restraint matures into moral and emotional resilience. There is also a philosophical depth to this practice. Much of modern life trains us to believe that freedom means satisfying every desire. Fasting quietly challenges that assumption. It teaches that true freedom is not the ability to indulge every urge, but the ability to rise above them. A person who cannot say no to hunger, comfort, or pleasure is not truly free. They are controlled by whatever they crave. But the one who can pause, wait, and restrain themselves possesses a different kind of power, the power of self-governance. This is why fasting has been honored across civilizations and spiritual traditions. It refines the human will and restores balance between body and soul. Socially, the impact is just as meaningful. A community that practices restraint together develops patience together. It becomes less driven by excess and more aware of limits, gratitude, and responsibility. Self-control at the individual level slowly shapes ethics at the collective level. When people learn to hold back their own desires, they are less likely to harm others in pursuit of them. In this way, fasting is not only a private spiritual exercise, it is a quiet foundation for a more compassionate and disciplined society. Yet, perhaps the most profound dimension of self-control through fasting is what it reveals about human potential. We often underestimate our capacity to change, telling ourselves that habits are permanent and weaknesses are fixed. Fasting interrupts that narrative. It demonstrates day after day that change is possible, that discipline can be learned, and that the soul is stronger than the body's demands. This realization plants the hope that if we can control hunger, we can also control our anger, our fears, and our destructive patterns. And so, the lesson of fasting is not simply that we can survive without food for a number of hours. The deeper lesson is that we are capable of governing ourselves, shaping our character, and choosing purpose over impulse. Hunger becomes a teacher, restraint becomes a strength, and discipline becomes a path to freedom. If fasting teaches us anything, it is this: the one who can control their desires can begin to control their destiny. If self-control is the first lesson of fasting, then purification is the quiet transformation that follows. When the body is restrained, something unexpected begins to happen within the heart and mind. The constant rhythm of consumption slows down essentially weary-earing glob trader in lincentivetrs and a deincentives and penalt. And in that slowing, space appears, space to think, to feel, to notice what is usually ignored. Much of our daily life is filled with noise, not only the noise of sound, but the noise of distraction, endless scrolling, constant conversation, perpetual urgency. Fasting interrupts that noise. It creates a stillness in which a person can finally hear themselves. Psychologically, human beings rarely confront their inner world because comfort keeps them occupied. When hunger enters the picture, however, awareness sharpens. Emotions that were buried begin to surface. One becomes more conscious of impatience, irritation, gratitude, and vulnerability. This is not a weakness of fasting, it is one of its greatest gifts. Purification is not the removal of flaws without effort. It is the honest recognition that those flaws exist. Only what is seen can be healed. In this way, fasting becomes a mirror, reflecting the true state of the heart with unusual clarity. There is also a profound mental reset that occurs. Constant consumption dulls appreciation. When everything is available, nothing feels meaningful. By temporarily stepping away from food, drink, and indulgence, fasting restores sensitivity to life's simplest blessings. A sip of water regains its sweetness, a quiet moment regains its peace, gratitude, which often feels abstract in times of ease, becomes immediate and real. This renewed awareness softens the heart, replacing entitlement with thankfulness and restlessness with calm. From a philosophical perspective, purification through fasting reminds us that the human being is layered. We are not only physical bodies seeking satisfaction, we are also inner selves seeking meaning. When the physical layer is constantly fed, the inner layer is often neglected. Fasting gently reverses that imbalance. It reduces attention to the outer and redirects it to the inner. Questions that usually remain distant begin to feel urgent. What truly matters? What kind of person am I becoming? What remains when comfort is removed? These are not small questions, and fasting gives them room to breathe. Spiritually, this inner clarity opens the door to sincerity. Acts of worship, reflection, and remembrance feel different when they emerge from a quieter heart. Words are no longer rushed. Supplications are no longer routine. There is a tenderness that appears when the soul is less distracted by the body. Even silence begins to feel meaningful rather than empty. This is why purification in fasting is not dramatic or loud. It is subtle, gradual, and deeply personal. It unfolds in moments of honesty that no one else may ever see. What makes this transformation powerful is its continuity. The goal is not merely to feel peaceful for a few hours of hunger, but to carry that clarity beyond the fast itself. When a person learns how to quiet the noise within, they gain a tool that can be used in every season of life, during success and failure, ease and hardship, certainty and doubt. Purification then becomes not an event but a direction. It shapes how one thinks, reacts, and chooses. And so fasting teaches us that the greatest cleansing is not of the body, but of the heart and mind. When distraction fades, truth becomes visible. When noise softens, meaning becomes audible. The one who learns to be still long enough to see themselves clearly is already on the path to becoming someone new. If purification refines the inner world of the individual, the next wisdom of fasting extends outward toward humanity itself. Hunger, even when temporary and chosen, changes the way we see other people. It moves suffering from an abstract idea to a lived sensation. For a few hours, the comfort we normally rely on is removed, and in that absence we begin to understand, however slightly, what millions experience not by choice, but by circumstance. This shift from knowledge to feeling is where empathy is born. Most people intellectually accept that poverty and hunger exist. We hear statistics, see images, and read reports, yet the heart often remains distant. information alone rarely transforms behavior. But when the body itself feels weakness, thirst, and longing for relief, the distance collapses. Compassion stops being theoretical and becomes personal. You no longer help others merely because you were told it is good. You help because, in a small but meaningful way, you now recognize their struggle. Fasting therefore educates the emotions, not just the mind. Psychologically, shared vulnerability is one of the strongest forces that binds human beings together. When comfort separates us, it is easy to become self-absorbed, assuming that our experience is the norm. Hunger disrupts that illusion. It reminds us how fragile ease truly is and how quickly circumstances can change. This realization humbles the ego. Gratitude increases, but so does responsibility, because once you recognize suffering, ignoring it becomes much harder. Awareness carries a moral weight. There is also a social philosophy embedded within this practice. A healthy society cannot be built only on personal success. It must be built on mutual care. Fasting trains communities to remember those who are often forgotten. Acts of charity, generosity, and service are not meant to be seasonal emotions that appear briefly and disappear. They are meant to become habits of concern. By linking spiritual discipline with feeding the hungry and supporting the vulnerable, fasting bridges the gap between devotion and justice. It teaches that worship without compassion is incomplete. On a deeper level, empathy developed through fasting protects the heart from hardness. One of the quiet dangers of comfort is indifference. When life feels secure, the suffering of others can seem distant or even irrelevant. Over time, this indifference erodes our humanity. Fasting interrupts that erosion. It softens what comfort tends to harden. Tears come more easily. Kindness feels more urgent. The pain of another person becomes something we cannot casually overlook. In this way, fasting preserves the moral sensitivity that makes us truly human. This transformation is not meant to end with the return of food at sunset. The real question is whether the compassion awakened during hunger survives in times of fullness. True empathy is measured not by what we feel when we are fasting, but by what we choose when we are comfortable again. Do we remember the hungry when our own plates are full? Do we give when giving is no longer emotionally convenient? Do we build lives that reduce suffering, even in small ways? These are the tests that reveal whether fasting has truly reached the heart. And perhaps the most profound realization is this: caring for others is not separate from spiritual growth. It is a central part of it. The path to becoming a better human being is inseparable from the path of easing another person's burden. Hunger teaches us this quietly, without speeches or arguments, simply by allowing us to feel what we would otherwise ignore. So, the lesson of fasting is not only that we endure hunger, but that we refuse to ignore those who endure it every day. If our hunger does not awaken compassion, then we have only missed a meal. But if it opens our hearts to others, then we have begun to understand what it truly means to be human. As self-control disciplines the body, purification clarifies the heart, and empathy opens us to others, fasting ultimately directs the human being towards something even higher, a deeper awareness of the spiritual dimension of life. When the physical world is intentionally quieted, even for a portion of the day, the soul begins to speak with greater clarity. What was once distant starts to feel near. What was once routine begins to feel meaningful. In this way, fasting is not an escape from the world, but a reorientation within it. Much of modern life trains us to live outwardly. Our attention is pulled toward achievement, appearance, productivity, and constant motion. While these pursuits are not inherently wrong, they can slowly crowd out the inner life. A person may succeed externally while feeling empty internally. connected to everything except the deeper purpose of their own existence. Fasting interrupts this imbalance. By reducing physical indulgence and slowing daily rhythm, it redirects attention inward and upward at the same time. The question subtly shifts from "what do I want right now" to "why am I here at all?" Psychologically, moments of restraint heighten awareness. When the senses are less occupied with consumption, perception sharpens in other ways. Silence feels more noticeable. Reflection feels more natural. Even time itself seems to move differently, less rushed, more deliberate. This altered awareness creates ideal conditions for spiritual presence. Prayer is no longer squeezed between distractions, but experienced with intention. Words spoken in remembrance carry emotional weight rather than habitual repetition. The heart, no longer overwhelmed by excess, becomes more receptive to meaning. There is also a profound humility embedded in fasting that strengthens spiritual connection. Hunger reminds the human being of dependence. No matter how powerful, wealthy, or independent a person may appear, the body's simplest needs reveal a deeper truth. We are not self-sustaining. We rely on provisions we did not create and forces we do not control. This realization softens arrogance and nurtures gratitude. Spiritual awareness often begins precisely at this point, when illusion of complete independence gives way to recognition of dependence upon something greater than ourselves. From a philosophical perspective, fasting restores balance between the material and the transcendent. Human beings live in both realms simultaneously. We eat, work, and interact in the physical world, yet we also search for meaning, truth, and permanence beyond it. When the material dominates completely, life can feel shallow. When the spiritual is nurtured, even ordinary moments gain depth. Fasting acts as a bridge between these dimensions. It does not deny the body, but it refuses to let the body define the whole of existence. It reminds us that we are more than what we consume. Spiritually, this renewed balance transforms worship from obligation into encounter. Acts of devotion performed while fasting often feel more sincere because they emerge from vulnerability rather than comfort. Supplication becomes honest, gratitude becomes emotional, hope becomes real. The distance between the individual and the divine feels smaller, not because the divine has moved closer, but because distractions that once filled the space have been gently removed. What remains is a quieter, clearer relationship rooted in awareness rather than habit. Yet the true measure of this strengthened connection is not how one feels during fasting hours, but who one becomes afterward. Spiritual experiences are not meant to remain temporary emotions. They are meant to shape lasting character. If fasting brings a person closer to truth, that closeness should appear in patience, integrity, mercy, and sincerity long after hunger has ended. Otherwise, the moment was felt but not followed. So, fasting teaches that the soul, when given attention, naturally turns toward what is higher, purer, and more meaningful than the distractions that usually surround it. It reveals that spiritual connection is not found by adding more noise to life, but by gently removing what prevents us from noticing what was always there. And perhaps this is the quiet invitation within every fast, to return, not just for a month or a moment, but for a lifetime, to a relationship with the divine that is conscious, sincere, and alive. Because the heart that truly reconnects with its creator never sees the world the same way again. As fasting deepens spiritual awareness and reconnects the heart to what is higher, it also serves another essential purpose. It becomes a training ground for real, lasting transformation. Up to this point, we have spoken about restraint, clarity, empathy, and connection. But all of these insights ultimately ask a single question: will anything actually change? Because knowledge without transformation is only information, and emotion without action fades quickly. Fasting, at its core, is meant to move a person from temporary feeling to permanent growth. One of the most powerful truths about human behavior is that habits shape destiny more than intentions do. Many people sincerely want to be more patient, more honest, more disciplined, more compassionate, yet wanting alone rarely produces change. What transforms character is repeated practice. Small, consistent acts that slowly reshape the self. Fasting provides exactly this kind of structured practice. For a defined period of time, a person consciously resists not only food and drink, but anger, gossip, dishonesty, and harmful impulses. This daily repetition begins to rewire instinct. Reactions that once felt automatic start to feel optional. Choice becomes visible where impulse once ruled. Psychologically, this process is profound because it restores a sense of agency. People often feel trapped by their own weaknesses, telling themselves, "This is just how I am." Fasting quietly challenges that narrative. It demonstrates in real time that change is possible. If someone can control what feels uncontrollable like hunger or irritation, then other forms of self-mastery suddenly feel within reach. This realization builds confidence, not the shallow confidence of ego, but the deeper confidence of self-knowledge, the understanding that growth is achievable through effort and sincerity. There is also an important moral dimension to this discipline. True fasting is not measured by physical endurance alone. A person may abstain from food yet still indulge in cruelty, arrogance, or injustice. Such restraint is incomplete. The deeper aim is alignment, bringing outward behavior into harmony with inward values. When speech becomes kinder, actions become fairer, and intentions become purer, fasting begins to fulfill its purpose. Transformation, then, is not dramatic or sudden. It is quiet, gradual, and often invisible to others. But over time, these small internal shifts accumulate into a different kind of person. From a philosophical perspective, this highlights a central truth about human life: we are not fixed beings. We are always in the process of becoming. Every choice either refines or diminishes us. Fasting intensifies this awareness by compressing moral decision making into daily experience. Each moment of restraint becomes a vote for the person one hopes to be. Each failure becomes an opportunity to return with greater honesty. In this way, fasting teaches responsibility without despair, holding us accountable while still leaving the door of change open. What makes this transformation meaningful is its continuity beyond the fasting period. The real success of fasting is not how a person behaves when discipline is externally structured, but who they remain when normal life resumes. Do patience and honesty continue when hunger is gone? Does compassion remain when routine returns? If the answer is yes, then fasting has achieved something remarkable. It has converted a temporary practice into a permanent direction. And perhaps this is the quiet miracle hidden within the discipline of fasting, that ordinary people, through sincere effort repeated over time, can reshape their inner world. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. The journey of transformation does not require dramatic moments. It requires consistent sincerity. Day by day, choice by choice, a new character is formed. So fasting ultimately asks more from us than endurance. It asks for change. It invites us to leave the month not simply lighter in body, but stronger in truth, steadier in character, and clearer in purpose. Because the fast that ends with sunset is temporary, but the fast that reforms the soul can last a lifetime. When discipline reshapes the self, purification clarifies the heart, empathy opens us to humanity, spiritual awareness reconnects us to the divine, and transformation begins to take root in Character, all of these paths converge toward one final realization. Fasting reminds us of our true purpose. Beneath the physical experience of hunger and the emotional journey of restraint lies a deeper question that every human being must eventually face: why are we here at all? In the rush of daily life, this question is often postponed. Responsibilities, ambitions, and distractions fill our attention so completely that existence becomes routine rather than meaningful. Fasting interrupts that routine and gently returns us to the essential. There is something profoundly revealing about voluntarily stepping away from comfort. When the usual sources of pleasure are paused, even briefly, we begin to notice how much of life is spent chasing satisfaction that never fully satisfies. Food ends hunger for a few hours. Achievement brings relief for a short moment. Entertainment distracts but rarely fulfills. Fasting exposes this cycle without condemnation. It simply allows us to see that the human heart seems to be searching for something more lasting than anything the material world alone can provide. This awareness is not pessimistic. It is deeply hopeful because it points toward meaning beyond consumption. Psychologically, purpose gives coherence to suffering. Hunger without meaning feels pointless, but hunger chosen for a higher reason becomes powerful. The same is true for life itself. Difficulties that appear random can feel overwhelming, yet when placed within a larger purpose, they become bearable and even transformative. Fasting trains the mind to connect sacrifice with significance. Each moment of patience becomes a reminder that endurance in the service of something greater is never wasted. This lesson gradually reshapes how a person understands hardship, turning frustration into growth and delay into wisdom. Philosophically, fasting challenges one of the most common assumptions of modern culture, the belief that the goal of life is maximum comfort. If comfort were truly the highest aim, then voluntarily embracing hunger would make no sense. Yet across centuries and civilizations, thoughtful people have practiced restraint precisely because they sensed that ease alone cannot define a meaningful existence. Purpose requires direction, and direction often requires sacrifice. Fasting becomes a living argument that the value of life is measured not by how much we consume, but by what we are willing to live for. This realization also restores perspective. Many anxieties that dominate daily thought begin to feel smaller when viewed through the lens of purpose. Status, comparison, and temporary loss lose some of their power. What remains important are questions of truth, character, service, and ultimate return. Fasting does not remove us from the world. It teaches us how to live in the world without being controlled by it. It reminds us that we are travelers rather than owners, caretakers rather than possessors, souls entrusted with time rather than bodies chasing endless desire. And perhaps the most beautiful dimension of this reminder is its simplicity. Purpose is not hidden in distant places or reserved for extraordinary people. It appears in sincere worship, honest work, compassion toward others, and integrity in private moments. Fasting clears the distractions that make purpose seem complicated and reveals that a meaningful life is built through conscious, everyday choices aligned with something eternal. What feels distant suddenly becomes Arabic, Noon Arabic, Deen Arabic, Dal Arabic, Farsi Ye Arabic Kaf, and what felt abstract becomes personal. The question, then, is not whether fasting has meaning, but whether we will carry that meaning forward once the hunger fades. A reminder only transforms us if we allow it to guide our decisions afterward. To remember our purpose is to live differently, to choose what is lasting over what is temporary, what is true over what is easy, and what is eternal over what is fleeting. Because in the end, fasting is not only about abstaining from food for a number of hours, it is about awakening from heedlessness for the rest of our lives. And the one who truly remembers why they were created will never again be satisfied living without purpose.